It is no secret that Canada's colleges and universities are plagued with wokeness. Since launching our Campus Watch series in November 2022, True North has exclusively reported on several woke trends taking place in academia. This includes the implementation of racial segregation and race-based hiring practices in the name of anti-racism and equity, diversity, and inclusion, also known as EDI. While popular among powerful figures in academia, EDI has been criticized by several professors, including Black and racialized scholars. Today, I have the pleasure of discussing this issue with renowned American scholar, Dr. Carol Swain. She is an award-winning political scientist, a former professor of political science and law at Vanderbilt University, and a former associate professor of politics and public policy at Princeton. As an African-American woman, Dr. Swain has been critical of the Black Lives Matter organization, critical race theory, and the equity, diversity, and inclusion agenda being pushed in academic institutions. She has also founded a business which offers organizations unity training, which she sees as an alternative to EDI training. Dr. Swain, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for asking me.
So the words equity, diversity, and inclusions, they sound nice, and I think the majority of people want institutions that are diverse, equal, and inclusive. However, EDI practices have been criticized by many, including yourself. So can you tell me what is the problem with EDI and the way that it's being used by academic institutions?
First of all, I would say that most of the people that I know, including myself, we welcome diversity, that diversity is positive. And if you look in nature, you look at the universe, I would say all of God's creation is diverse and has been diverse from the very beginning. And within the realm of affirmative action and the new diversity, equity, inclusion, diversity as part of a government program or institutional effort that started after affirmative action. And at that time, it meant that recruiters and people would go into communities where people were underrepresented, and they would make them aware of opportunities that they may have missed. And they would recruit the best and brightest from those communities and try to give them whatever assistance they might need to bring themselves up to speed. And in the case of myself, I was a high school dropout who dropped out of school after completing the 8th grade. I married. By the time I was 21, I had 3 small children. And for me, people encouraged me. I got a high school equivalency. I went to a community college. And while I was there, I took remedial math. I received a lot of encouragement from people to continue my education. And so because of the encouragement I got from individuals that believed in diversity and inclusion and outreach, and they were concerned about the historical discrimination against Blacks, they put an effort into making sure that people like me were aware of opportunities.
You know, you have a business called where you do unity training, and you've said in one of the videos that multi-ethnicity is something that's a good thing for organizations. And I think there's a lot of ways in which diversity can be good for different groups. Right now in academia, there are demographics that are underrepresented, and students of those demographics say they would like to see more people of their identity, including more professors of their identity on campus. So I guess, how can we have more diverse institutions without modern day affirmative action and quotas and
Well, they
other
can't be.
EDI?
Here's the problem. And I've watched the transformation of universities because I started my college education in the 70s. And in the 80s, I went to graduate school. In the 90s, I started teaching and, was tenured at Princeton and at Vanderbilt universities. In the 2000s, I was at the universities, and I noticed how the approach changed. And I can tell you that when I started my education, the focus was on equal opportunity and non-discrimination. Equity is not the same as equal opportunity. And when I started my college education, I had an equal opportunity to fail or succeed. And I saw many people fail, that the universities opened up the floodgate. They brought in lots of people, and many of those were not able to compete at the institutions where they were admitted. And so they fell by the wayside. I don't know how many of those actually returned to college, but it was clear that in some instances, people were being admitted into institutions just so the institutions would look good, that they would get their numbers up. And they were not prepared, and they dropped out, or they were flunked out. And what I think that has happened now is there's been an overemphasis on the numbers, trying to get proportional representation, and standards have been lowered to the point that you get people in, they are struggling. And so some of them end up in the ethnic studies program where it's easier to succeed. And the universities changed to the point that it's almost impossible to flunk out. And so in my era, you could flunk out. You were expected, if you were a racial and ethnic minority, to meet the same standards. What is happening today is detrimental to American education, as well as to the health and well-being of the people who are admitted under that system, because some of those students, they are angry, and they should be, because they've been used, and they've been used to advance the goals of the institution. The institution wants to look good. And you asked me what would happen if affirmative action was eliminated. Before affirmative action, if you go back and do your history, even before, the early 1800s, early 1900s, you had Blacks at institutions that did not discriminate. And so institutions in New England or the Northeast that did not prohibit Blacks, that they admitted people based on qualifications, you had Black people there. They were not in large numbers, but they were there. And during the 1950s, when the civil service tests were a big deal in getting a government job, the job went to the person that had the highest scores. The Black middle class in Washington, D.C. and places like that are there because they love the test, because with the test, it went to the person with the highest score. And so it took the discrimination out of it. So a merit-based system is something that minorities, under the worst conditions, they were able to rise to the top and prepare themselves and, astonish everyone else, because they had to work a little bit harder, but they did it. So take away affirmative action, you change the incentive structure, you change people's behavior. The ones that want to be at Ivy League schools will be at Ivy League schools. The ones that want to be at state schools, people will be more likely to be admitted to the institutions where they are qualified to be. There will be more success stories. And so I think it would be good for society as a whole.
Right. And actually kind of leads on to my next question. There are some who believe this, critical race theory narrative. They believe that grading is part of the problem and that grading upholds racism. We're seeing universities now implement pass-fail grading systems and move away from standardized admission exams such as the LSAT. What impacts do you think removing grading, removing these tests will have on the Black community?
It impacts everyone. It doesn't just impact the Black community. And so the idea that whether it's crime or reducing academic standards, that this is just something that's going to affect racial and ethnic minorities, that's ludicrous. When you argue that math is racist and that depending on your ethnicity, you might get a different answer, you're teaching that to everyone. And so all of a sudden, something that we always knew, 2 + 2 = 4, well, maybe not. If you're Black, it could be 6 or it could be 8. You're telling everyone that. And what I think is going to happen is that this new approach is going to harm society as a whole, because people are not going to be qualified to do the things they were qualified before, because there are certain fields where you need a strong mathematical background. You know, you need people that excel in calculus and algebra and all of those things. And then there are other fields where you need people that excel in areas that may not be so quantitative. There is variety and diversity among human beings, but when you lower the standards, you make it unsafe for society as a whole. You make it less likely that racial and ethnic minorities that want to go into fields where you have to really prepare yourself with rigor, that they would go into those fields and be successful. And I believe the people that push that agenda are racist, that they're racist to the core, that it has nothing to do with trying to increase the number of racial and ethnic minorities, but it has everything to do with their beliefs that minorities are inferior. They're so inferior that you're not going to have enough of them unless you remove the standards. They're not lowering the standards now, they're trying to remove the standards.
Right. I guess a belief that is kind of linked to this idea of removing the tests is this idea that white supremacy is embedded in academic institutions, and they will say that that is why, for example, that Black students have an average lower GPA than white students, they have lower SAT scores, and they're more likely to drop out of schools. What do you think
I understand all of that.
What
I do.
What do you think is causing these disparities between, let's say, Black students and white students when it comes to test scores?
There were some studies that were done in the 1990s, and I think it was Shaker Heights, Ohio, a study in particular where they looked at affluent Blacks, and their children were not doing so well. And one of the things that's come out of some of the educational studies, because at one time the progressives on campus or the faculty members, they actually studied real world problems and tried to identify it in a way using the scientific method. And they found that Black students studied that Black students studied the least amount of time of any of the other groups. The Blacks, you know, kind of they were at the bottom, Asians were at the top, whites were somewhere in the middle, but the average Black student, you know, was spending, I don't remember the exact number of minutes on their homework, but it was not a much. Asian students were spending like maybe 4 hours on their homework, but I think that the group disparities have to do with cultural norms. And if you're watching a lot of television now, playing a lot of video games, because that was not an issue back then the way it is now, that you cannot be prepared for the rigorous standards that would be expected normally in college. And so I don't think that it has anything to do with white supremacy. In fact, white students are being affected almost in the same way as Black students. The standards have dropped for everyone. Everyone's expectations, everyone wants a free grade handed to them. There's less emphasis on hard work. And so whatever you do with one group, it affects every other group. So with racial and ethnic minorities, I think that the standards have been dropped so low for some groups that they get into those institutions, they won't flunk out if they show up for class, but they're not getting educated. They're in over their heads and they're miserable. And that's why they're out there protesting and wanting to burn down the place. And in some institutions, they have separate course sections for racial and ethnic minorities. So they're resegregating. You have people by their own demands resegregating on campus. We had a civil rights movement that was supposed to end segregation. And now you have Black people clamoring for segregation.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as white supremacy, I wrote a book in 2002, The New White Nationalism in America, Its Challenge to Integration. At that time, of white supremacists, they were the small percentage of white people that thought because of they were Caucasian, they were superior to other groups. It was minuscule. And also the KKK at that time probably had 2,000 members out of 350 million people. And so white supremacy and all of that stuff was dying, going away. what the left did was redefine white supremacy to include all white people, make the argument that whiteness is property, make the argument that all white people are privileged, even the ones in Appalachia and distressed areas of the country. And so they're playing some kind of dangerous game that does not benefit racial and ethnic minorities. It doesn't benefit the white population. It doesn't benefit the Asian or the Hispanic populations. The only people it might benefit are the cultural Marxists that are pushing this revamped idea of diversity, equity, inclusion, where they have redefined the words, and they're constantly redefining all the words to fit their agenda.
Yeah, for sure. And you brought up segregation, and what we've been doing at True North, is we've been exposing here in Canada a lot of new segregated Black spaces that are being established in Canadian universities. There are now some universities with Black-only student lounges, Black-only study halls, Black-only workshops, and even Black-only yoga classes. And one of the arguments in favor of these spaces is they say Black students need a safe community place where they can share lived experiences without the white
Right now, that's called
gaze.
critical theory.
Right. What are your thoughts on this idea that students need to be segregated in order to feel safe?
Well, I mean, I know American history better than I know Canadian history, but the whole purpose of integration and affirmative action was to bring people together. And as a Christian, I believe that there's one race, the human race, and within the human race, you know, you see differences among people, but you see differences among every variety of living creature. And so I think that this resegregation is a way for the elites to not have to deal with the quote Black problem, because there are problems that are particular to Black communities. And they have lowered the standards to the point, even when it comes to crime in America, where yes, they want to defund the police and they want to release dangerous criminals out on the street, and they want bail reform so that criminals don't go to jail. And you can't keep the kind of crime that comes from that from not spilling over into other communities. Plus, it's not something that the Black rank and file want. Like even during the defund the police movement that followed George Floyd's death, something like 80% of Black Americans wanted more police presence. They wanted better interactions with police, but they wanted more police presence. And all of these things that are taking place are things that white people with their hand-picked minority elites are pushing. It's not to the benefit of the people or the world.
I do want to talk about dealing with these issues now, maybe from a policy perspective. Florida is proposing a EDI ban. Several states are banning critical race theory in education. Are government-imposed bans on these ideologies the right way to deal with this issue?
Well, I testified before the Texas Senate Education Committee last week, and I will testify again the following a week from now about a different bill. The bill that I testified in favor of was against compelled speech at colleges and universities, where students that may be more conservative or they may be Christian are being forced to participate in activities or to espouse certain beliefs that run contrary to science as well as their conscience. And that's a violation of the First Amendment. The First Amendment in America protects free speech, but it also protects people from being compelled to engage in certain actions. And so I think that that's important for that legislation. And when it comes to critical race theory is one of several different critical theories that come from cultural Marxism. The problem with many of those theories is that they violate the Civil Rights Acts of the United States, as well as the Constitution's Equal Protection Clause. So yes, I think government is justified in passing new legislation to make sure that people's rights are protected. And many people don't know that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and its amendments protects white people, it protects males, it protects Christians, as well as other religions, the Constitution. And so I think it is appropriate for states to ensure that all the citizens are protected equally under the law. And that's what the CRT DEI bans are all about.
Right, for sure. I do want to ask you a more personal question. Since 2020, especially in America, but also here in Canada, there has been a lot of talk about racism. Did you experience racism when you were a student and a scholar? And how did you deal with that, as well as other barriers that were present during your academic journey?
I did not experience racism. I experienced classism because I came from the underclass, and most of my mentors were white. And they were the ones that encouraged me and pushed me to get a PhD. I came from a class where I came from a background. I was a first generation college student. I had dropped out of school. All of my siblings dropped out of school. I did not know anything about becoming a university professor. And when I started the community college, I just wanted a 2-year degree. I was going to get a job, and I applied for jobs. I was told I needed a 4-year degree. I decided to become an honor student, and I had made the dean's list a couple of times at the community college by just studying. I made C's without studying. This was in the 1970s, but I decided I wanted to be an honor student so that I could get a better job. I checked out books and purchased books on how to make A's in college, how to take essay exams, how to take objective tests, and I applied the principles, the study skills. And my first semester at my 4-year college, I had a 3.7 GPA, and I was one of 20 Blacks there. And I graduated magna cum laude. And I had, I did not have the preparation that I would have gotten in high school in science and math. So I waited until I was a senior to take science and math. And at the community college, I took remedial math. And I have been successful because I have believed that if I worked hard and got an education, it would make a difference. But I would never have gone as far as I did in the educational realm. I have 5 degrees, a community college degree in business. I wanted to do art. I have art skills. I wanted to be a commercial artist. I was told to be practical. And I was always a person that when authority figures or people I respected gave me advice, I often followed their advice. So when I was told that a commercial art degree was not practical, I chose business. And the first degree was in business. The second degree was in criminal justice. And that degree, by then, I knew that I needed to be an honor student and that I was good in anything that didn't have too much math in it. As the 4-year degree, I had to take a stats course and a math course and 2 sciences. And I was able to get my bachelor's degree earning only 1 C. And that C was in a stats course. I earned an A in math. And how I earned that A was after it was finite math. I did not do well on the first exam. I dropped the class immediately and spoke with the professor. He allowed me to sit through the whole class to take the test, not for credit. And so I sat through the whole class, and then I retook it the next year. But I worked so many problems so that when I was actually taking the final, it was like an out-of-body experience. I was on automatic pilot. I had done those problems so many times. And so I earned an A in a math class, but it was all strategy. And so a lot of the things that have made for my success was me knowing my own self, knowing my strengths and knowing my weaknesses and coming up with a plan. And I think that I wasn't looking for someone else to do it for me. I knew my strengths and I knew my weaknesses, and I had a plan.
Right,
I
for
know as far as
sure.
the racism, this thing that's important about the racism is that my race has benefited me far more than it's hurt me, because as an honor student, Black, everyone would know my name immediately after the first exam. And there were some psychology classes that would have over 100 people. I could do one of those psychology tests in probably 10 minutes and have the highest grade. And so my reputation was such that I was known all across the campus. If I had been white, male or female, I would not have been known. It would just be another white person that excelled. But because I was Black, and I guess people may have had lowered expectations. In fact, my advisor, who later became a friend, told me when I was being admitted to the college not to expect to do well because that this college, Roanoke College in Salem, Virginia, was a very difficult school. And my personality is such that that was throwing down the gauntlet. All you have to do is tell me that I can't do something, and I'm going to show you that I can. And so that has helped me a lot. But I have encountered very little racism. And when I did encounter it, it came from the liberal professors on campus.
Dr. Carol Swain, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure. And maybe we will talk again sometime.
To support our Campus Watch series and other objective, independent journalism, visit donate.tnc.news. If you're watching this on YouTube, please don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. For True North, I'm Elie Cantin-Nantel.